The first sounds I remember weren't lullabies or bedtime stories. They were the groan of our old windmill creaking in the Texas breeze and the hum of cicadas buzzing in the cotton fields. Willow Creek, my hometown, wasn't the kind of place you found on maps unless you squinted real hard. A single blinking traffic light, a diner that smelled permanently of fried chicken. A church bell that told whether or not there was service. It was the kind of place where everybody knew your name. And if they didn't, they surely knew your people. I was born in 1963, second week of July. In a heat wave so merciless the asphalt on Main Street melted under car tires. Mama liked to joke that I came into the world sweating, which might explain why I've been fighting uphill battles with grit ever since. My parents, Clara and Henry Reynolds, owned 50 stubborn acres of cotton, sorghum, and sheer determination. Daddy had a back bent by years of lifting hands, the texture of old leather, and a patience forged from coaxing green things out of dry soil. Mama, sharp-eyed and practical, ran the household with a ledger book in one hand and a wooden spoon in the other. We weren't rich, but we weren't poor either, not by Willow Creek standards. We lived in a 2-story farmhouse painted white once upon a time, though by my childhood the paint had peeled into a patchwork of grays and creams. The porch wrapped all the way around, and summer evenings found us out there snapping beans into metal bowls while the crickets sang. Daddy would sit with a toothpick hanging lazy from his mouth, telling us stories of his boyhood during the Dust Bowl years. "Life's like this old tractor," he'd say, slapping the side of his rust-red John Deere with affection. "It'll break down more times than you can count. But if you study it, truly study a tool, find a way to get her running again." Mama's wisdom was sharper, like the edge of her kitchen knife slicing through pie crust. "If the world hands you a bad harvest, okay, Maggie," she told me once when I was sulking over a broken toy, "don't sit there and cry about it. Plant something new." Those words got under my skin, rooted themselves deep, though I didn't fully understand their power until much later. I had 2 older sisters, Ellen and Faye, who already thought they were ladies by the time I was old enough to follow them around. Ellen was bookish and bossy, her hair always pulled into a tight braid that seemed to announce she was too busy for nonsense. Faye was the flirt, always twirling in hand-me-down dresses and practicing smiles in the mirror. Then, when I was 10, came Tommy, our surprise baby brother. His arrival turned our family upside down, but in the best way. Mama swore she was too old to be chasing after diapers again, but the moment she held him, her face softened like butter in the sun. Life on the farm was steady, but never easy. Summers baked the soil until it cracked. Winters howled cold enough to seep through patched coats. I learned chores young. At 12, Daddy taught me how to mend fences. We'd walk the property line at dawn, the fog still hugging the sorghum fields, my hands raw from hauling posts. "You see this, Maggie?" Daddy pointed to a sagging stretch of wire. "The world'll always try to tear down what you build. Your job is to set it right again." I nodded, not quite realizing he wasn't just talking about fences. The tornado came 2 years later. I was 14, halfway between awkward and stubborn. My heart already itching for something bigger than Willow Creek. That spring had been hot, sticky and restless, the kind of weather that makes your skin crawl before the storm even shows. When the sirens wailed, we huddled in the root cellar, Tommy crying in Mama's arms, Ellen whispering prayers. The earth above us roared like it was being torn apart when we finally emerged. Half the barn was gone, roof splintered, walls scattered like matchsticks. The wind had stolen our hay bales, tossed our tools, scattered our livestock across neighboring fields. Our crops looked shredded, like a giant hand had clawed through them. I saw Mama standing in the yard, her shoulders shaking as she stared at the bills she clutched. It was the first time I ever saw her cry, but she didn't cry long. The next morning, she tied her hair back, rolled up her sleeves, and said, "We rebuild." And rebuild we did. Daddy focused on the barn, Ellen kept the household running. Mama figured out how to stretch our dollars thin enough to breathe. I took charge of raising money, organized a bake sale in front of the church, roped my classmates into a fundraiser at the football field. I even sold my bicycle, the blue one. Daddy had bought me for my 12th birthday so we could afford feed for the animals by the time I was 15. The new barn stood crooked but sturdy, built by neighbors' hands and our own sweat. That was my first taste of turning despair into action. I didn't call it resilience back then. I just knew that when something broke, you had two choices: sit in the rubble or start hammering Willow Creek. High was where I tested my other muscles, the ones in my head. The school was a squat brick building with peeling paint. One hallway for grades 9 through 12 and a gym that doubled as cafeteria and assembly hall. My favorite class was history. I was mesmerized by stories of pioneers, women who carved homes out of nothing but grit and willpower. Math came easy too. I used to balance Mama's ledgers in the evenings, turning columns of numbers into neat solutions like puzzles waiting to be solved. But I wasn't all brains and books. I had fire in me too. When Carla, the school bully, spread rumors about my patched jeans, I didn't swing at her like I wanted to. Instead, I challenged her to a debate in history class on women's suffrage. The teacher nearly fainted when I slammed her argument into the ground, citing facts and fire until the room applauded. Carla never bothered me again. That was when I realized you don't always need fists to fight. Sometimes words, sharp and steady, cut deeper than any punch, of course. High school wasn't just about tests and rivalries. There was Billy Starr, quarterback with dimples deep enough to hide in, and a smile that made my heart skip. He was my first love, the kind that feels like forever when you're 17. We danced under the football stadium lights, whispered dreams in the back of his old pickup, promised futures we barely understood. And then, senior year, he dumped me for a cheerleader with shinier hair and fancier shoes. My heart cracked like our old barn roof in that tornado. I cried into my pillow for nights, convinced the world was ending. But then I remembered Mama's words. If the world hands you a bad harvest, plant something new. So I planted my energy into books, into late nights studying until my eyes blurred. I graduated valedictorian, scholarship in hand, ready to trade Willow Creek's dusty roads for Austin's bustling streets. When I walked across that stage in my cap and gown, I didn't just leave behind a boy. I left behind the girl who thought her worth was tied to someone else's smile. Leaving. Willow Creek at 18 felt like shedding a skin that had grown too tight. I looked back at our farm, at the fields swaying under the Texas sun, at the porch where Mama and Daddy waved goodbye, and I promised myself, whatever storms lay ahead, I'd remember the soil I came from. Because storms didn't scare me anymore. I'd already learned they could knock you down, but they could also teach you how to stand taller. By the time I turned 16, Willow Creek felt both too small and too large for me. Too small because I wanted more than Friday night football games and gossip at the diner. And too large because every mistake I made seemed to echo through town like a church bell. In Willow Creek, privacy was a myth. If I tripped in the hallway at school, Mrs. Douglas was telling Mama about it at the post office before I even limped home. High school had its own rhythm. Mornings started with the squeak of sneakers on linoleum floors and the smell of chalk dust hanging heavy in the classrooms. Our principal doubled as the bus driver. And teachers weren't above calling you by your older sister's name if they forgot who you were. But for all its limitations, that little brick school gave me something invaluable, a stage to test myself. Take Carla, for example. She'd been a thorn in my side since middle school. Always quick to notice the patches on my jeans or the way my shoes didn't quite match. Her daddy ran the only hardware store in town, so she strutted like royalty. The day she made a joke about my farm girl smell in history class, something in me snapped. I didn't raise my fists, I raised my hand. "Mr. Jenkins," I said, my voice steady though, my heart thumped. "Why don't Carla and I debate women's suffrage next week? You always say history lives when we argue it." The challenge hung in the air like thunder. Carla smirked, thinking she'd crush me. But when the day came, I stood at the front of that classroom with my notes in neat columns and fire in my voice. I spoke about Susan B. Anthony, about women who fought for a voice when the world told them to sit down. Carla stumbled, unprepared for facts wrapped in passion. By the time I finished, the room erupted in applause. Mr. Jenkins grinned so wide his glasses fogged. Carla never picked on me again. That moment lit something inside me. I realized words could be weapons sharp, precise, and far more powerful than fists. Still, I wasn't all steel and sharpness. I was 16, with hormones humming like a live wire. And Billy Thompson was gasoline on the fire. Billy was everything Willow Creek adored. Quarterback. Broad shoulders, easy smile. He drove an old red Ford that backfired at stoplights. And he made you feel like you were the only person in the world when he looked your way. The first time he asked me to the fall dance, my knees nearly buckled. We dated all through junior year. Nights at the drive-in, his arm draped around me, the smell of buttered popcorn and gasoline in the air. Saturday afternoons on the lake, skipping stones while he promised me forever in that lazy drawl of his. I believed him. At 17, why wouldn't I? Forever felt as real as the moon hanging over us, but forever has a short shelf life in high school. By senior year, Billy's eye had wandered. First, it was late replies to my notes slipped in his locker. Then it was skipping our usual Saturday drives because the guys needed him. Finally, was the cheerleader Shannon with her perfect hair and store-bought smile. I found out the night of prom. I'd spent weeks sewing beads onto a second-hand dress, Mama helping me hem it just right. I waited by the gymnasium doors, clutching a corsage I'd bought for him with tips from babysitting. Billy never showed. Someone whispered he'd arrived with Shannon instead. His hand on the small of her back like it used to rest on mine. The humiliation burned hotter than any heartbreak. I cried until my pillow was damp, the cheap beads from my dress digging into my skin. For days, I couldn't meet anyone's eyes at school. Small towns don't just witness your heartbreak, they pass it around like a casserole. But then, after the tears dried, anger took root. Not the kind of anger that lashes out, but the kind that sharpens. I threw myself into schoolwork, stayed up until midnight with textbooks splayed across my bed. I helped Mama with the farm ledgers, turning numbers into something steady when everything else felt uncertain. I started dreaming bigger of Austin, of college, leaving behind the narrow lanes where people measured a girl's worth by who she dated, by graduation. I wasn't just valedictorian. I was reborn. When I stood at the podium in that overcrowded gym, staring out at parents fanning themselves with programs, I didn't think of Billy or Shannon. I thought of Mama's words. If the world hands you a bad harvest, plant something new. I planted my heartbreak into ambition. I watered it with stubbornness. And I promised myself that when I left Willow Creek, I'd never let anyone else define me again. The day I boarded the bus to Austin with one suitcase and a scholarship in hand, I looked out the window at the fields fading in the distance. Daddy had hugged me tight that morning, whispering, "Study the bull, Maggie. Learn its moves before you make your own." Mama just smiled through watery eyes and said, "Go plant something new." I did, and though I didn't know it yet, those lessons, Carla's sneer, Billy's betrayal. The tornado's wreckage were the training grounds for storms much larger than I could imagine. Austin in 1981 was a different planet compared to Willow Creek. The air itself seemed alive, thick with the scent of barbecue smoke, the hum of guitars drifting from 6th Street bars, and the buzz of a city just beginning to sense its own future. For a girl like me who had grown up counting the ticks of cicadas and the cycles of crops, it was overwhelming and exhilarating all at once. The bus ride into the city had been long, and I remember pressing my forehead against the window as the skyline emerged modest by today's standards. But to me, it looked like opportunity carved into steel and glass. My scholarship to Austin Community College was my golden ticket, though it didn't come with much else. Rent, books, and meals would be up to me. And Mama's parting words still rang in my ears. Plant something new. I planted myself in a cramped one-bedroom apartment 2 miles from campus. The paint peeled, the pipes rattled, and the cockroaches were bold enough to wave hello. But it was mine. I taped pictures of the farm on the wall, Mama and Daddy on the porch. Tommy holding a chicken twice his size so I wouldn't forget where I'd come from. The diner life to keep the lights on. I landed a job at Smokey Joe's BBQ. It wasn't glamorous grease burns on my forearms, the constant sting of smoke in my eyes, and drunks who thought darlin' was a compliment, but it paid the rent. Smokey Joe himself was a barrel-chested man with a voice like gravel and a heart of gold. "Work hard, kid," he told me on my first shift, handing me an apron that smelled of pork fat and onions, "and the tips'll come." He was right. I learned quickly how to read people. The truckers wanted endless coffee and a smile. The office workers liked their sandwiches stacked high and their egos stroked higher. College kids came in late, broke but loud, and I knew which ones might scrape together an extra dollar tip if I remembered. Their favorite order, the diner, was my second classroom. There I mastered patience, charm, and the art of holding my tongue even when I wanted to snap. I also learned hustle. Every extra rib I sold, every slice of pie I talked someone into. Went into the Dream Fund, a battered coffee can I kept hidden in my closet. By day, I studied real estate and business. Contracts, zoning laws, spreadsheets. By night, I studied human nature, what made people tick, what made them open their wallets, what made them trust. Hard lessons, of course. Not every day was a triumph. There were nights when my feet ached so badly I cried walking up the stairs to my apartment. Mornings when exhaustion made me nod off in lectures. Times when I questioned whether I'd made a mistake leaving. Willow Creek's predictable rhythm for this grind. But every time doubt crept in, I remembered the tornado. I remembered the bake sales in the barn we rebuilt with blistered hands. If I could do that at 14, I could survive greasy aprons and late-night study sessions. One particular night stands out even now. It was near closing, and a man in a suit lingered at a corner booth, nursing his third whiskey. I was ready to clock out, but Smokey Joe nodded at me. "Give him another on the house. He looks like he needs company." I sat down across from the stranger, cautious. He turned out to be a local real estate broker, weary from a deal gone bad. As he talked, I listened, really listened, and asked a few questions that showed I understood more than most waitresses should about contracts. And property lines. He looked at me with surprise. "You studying real estate?" "Yes, sir. Hoping to start my own business one day." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Darlin', this town eats dreamers alive. But I like your grit. Stop by my office sometime, see how it's really done." That conversation planted the seed. First steps into real estate by 1985. I had graduated with my associate's degree and was juggling shifts at Smokey Joe's with an internship at Hill Country Realty, the firm that broker had helped me into. It wasn't glamorous. My first tasks were filing, making coffee, and sitting in on meetings where I wasn't expected to say a word. The older male agents called me sweetheart and assumed I'd never last. But I watched, I listened. I learned how they pitched properties, how they calmed nervous buyers, how they juggled numbers to make deals look sweeter than they were. And slowly, I started speaking up. At 24. I closed my first deal, a strip mall on the east side that everyone else had dismissed as a lost cause. I'd spotted potential, a growing neighborhood. Traffic flow that promised foot traffic hand convinced a hesitant investor to take a chance. When the papers were signed, my boss looked at me like he'd just underestimated the wrong farm girl, of course. Mistakes taught me even faster. Once I trusted a handshake promise instead of insisting on proper paperwork. That mistake cost me $10,000 and a week of sleepless nights. But I learned. Never again would I confuse charm with integrity. Asterisk, by ISK, I'd scraped together enough to buy my first fixer-upper, a sagging Victorian in East Austin. Weekends found me in overalls, swinging a sledgehammer, studying plumbing diagrams at the library, and rewiring outlets with the help of VHS tapes. My hands blistered, my back ached, but when I finally sold that house for twice what I'd paid, I cried tears of pride. That sale was the birth of Reynolds Realty in 1992. It wasn't much a corner office in a strip mall, a second-hand desk, and a rotary phone, but it was mine. I'd gone from snapping beans on a farm porch to signing deeds in a city office. And every scar along the way felt like proof that I belonged. And though I didn't know it yet, the same resilience that had carried me from Willow Creek to Austin would one day be the shield I needed when betrayal came knocking. The day I opened the doors of Reynolds Realty in 1992, I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff. My office was laughable by most standards, an old dentist space in a strip mall between a laundromat and a pawn shop. The carpet smelled faintly of bleach, the blinds hung crooked, and my reception area was nothing more than two mismatched chairs I'd picked up from a garage sale. But when I unlocked that door and set a pot of coffee brewing, it was mine, my name on the window, my future waiting inside. I didn't have investors, wealthy family, or a safety net. What I had was grit, a reputation for being honest, and a Rolodex of contacts I'd built from years of working harder than anyone else in the room. Asterisk in those early months. Every client was a lifeline. I canvassed neighborhoods, knocking on doors until my knuckles were raw. I plastered handmade flyers on bulletin boards in diners, laundromats, and grocery stores. I placed tiny ads in the back pages of the Austin Chronicle. Most days, I ate peanut butter sandwiches at my desk, calculating how many houses I'd have to sell just to cover rent. Nights were spent studying neighborhoods, zoning changes, and market trends until my eyes blurred. There were weeks when no one walked through that door. I remember one evening, slumped in my chair, staring at the phone, willing it to ring. Doubt whispered in my ear, maybe the old boys club was right. Maybe there isn't room for you here. But I'd been through worse. Tornadoes, heartbreak, and long nights in greasy diners had forged me. So I dug in. Help came in the form of Lena Martinez. She walked in one afternoon looking for work, her dark hair pulled into a nonsense bun and her eyes sharp enough to slice steel. "I hear you're hiring," she said. I wasn't. I couldn't afford anyone. But Lena had this energy, steady, unshakable, and before I knew it, I'd made her an offer I could barely pay. She became my first assistant, then my right hand, and eventually the sister I'd always wanted. Lena kept me sane through the long days, juggling phone calls, filing paperwork, and gently reminding me to eat something other than coffee and crackers. "You've got the vision," she'd say, tapping her pen against a contract. "I'll handle the rest." And she did. Asterisk, not every deal was a victory. In 1993, I nearly lost everything on a downtown property that turned out to be riddled with structural problems. The inspector had missed it, and the seller had conveniently forgotten to mention the rot. I spent weeks in court, drained my savings, and walked away with nothing but a bitter taste and a lesson carved deep. Always, always double-check the foundation. That failure shook me, but it didn't break me. If anything, it sharpened my instincts. By 1995, Reynolds Realty had carved out a small niche, working-class families looking for their first home, immigrant families building new lives, teachers and nurses who needed someone to fight for their corner of the market. The big developers didn't notice me yet. Asterisk. It was around that time that Frank Reynolds walked into my office, tall, broad-shouldered, with an easy smile that could melt butter. Frank was everything I wasn't: charming, confident, the kind of man who filled a room without trying. He'd grown up in Dallas, had a finance degree, and was in town working on commercial investment projects. He came in to talk about a property deal. But before long, we were talking about more than contracts. "Do you ever slow down?" he teased one evening as I pored over spreadsheets. "Not if I can help it," I replied, grinning despite myself. Frank made me laugh in a way I hadn't in years. He brought flowers to the office, took me out for dinners I couldn't afford, and told me I deserved the world. For the first time since Billy's betrayal back in Willow Creek, I let myself believe in love again. When we married in 1997, Lena was my maid of honor, and Reynolds Realty got a new partner. Frank officially joined the firm. His financial savvy complemented my instincts, and together we began to climb. Asterisk, our big break came in 1998, when we landed a contract to manage a redevelopment project on the east side. It was risky: an abandoned factory converted into loft apartments, but I saw the potential. Frank crunched the numbers. Lena handled the logistics, I poured every ounce of charm and grit I had into selling the dream. The project sold out faster than anyone expected. Suddenly, Reynolds Realty wasn't just a mom-and-pop firm in a strip mall. We were on the map. Investors started calling. Developers invited me to the table. And for the first time, I felt the tide turning. But success came at a cost. Frank wanted children. I did too. But fertility didn't come easy for us. Years of trying, miscarriages that broke me in ways I never spoke aloud. Doctor visits that ended in sterile reassurances. Asterisk when Sophie was finally born in 2001. She was a miracle. I held her in my arms, tiny and fierce, and promised her the world. But balancing motherhood with business wasn't simple. I missed first steps, school plays, and quiet evenings because I was out chasing deals. Frank grew frustrated, though he rarely said it outright. And in the shadows of our success, tiny cracks began to form. Cracks I didn't yet see clearly because I was too busy climbing. Asterisk. By the time Sophie was born in 2001, Reynolds Realty had moved from the strip mall into a polished downtown office with glass walls and a receptionist who greeted clients with a smile. On paper, I had everything thriving business. Respected name, a husband who was both partner and supporter, and now a daughter I'd prayed for through sleepless nights and silent tears. But life is never that tidy. Asterisk. Sophie came into the world small but fierce. From the first time she wrapped her tiny fist around my finger, I knew I'd do anything for her. Holding her. I thought of Mama and all the sacrifices she had made back in Willow Creek. I promised myself I'd be just as strong, just as present. But promises are easier to make than to keep. Motherhood was a different battlefield. Business had taught me contracts and negotiations. Sophie taught me sleepless nights and the fragile terror of watching over someone so utterly dependent. I'd rock her in the nursery at 2 a.m., whispering stories of tornadoes and farm porches while emails piled up on my laptop. When she smiled at me, toothless and trusting, I felt torn into half the mother she deserved. Half the businesswoman I needed to be. Frank adored Sophie. He'd scoop her up, tossing her in the air until she giggled, his face lit with joy. At those moments, I saw the man I had fallen in love with, the dreamer, the optimist, the man who made me believe I wasn't alone. But Frank was also restless. He wanted expansion, bigger projects, riskier investments. He wanted Reynolds Realty to not just succeed, but dominate. "You think too small sometimes, Maggie," he said once, pacing the living room while Sophie dozed on my chest. "We could take this statewide. National, even. Why limit ourselves?" I bristled. Because every step bigger means more debt, more risk, more chance of losing everything we've built. He sighed, frustration clouding his features. "You're too cautious. We loved each other, but business and marriage don't always mix cleanly." Our fights weren't about love. They were about vision, about how high to climb, about how much to gamble. Asterisk through it all, Lena was my steady ground. She was Sophie's godmother, the aunt who never missed a school play when I couldn't be there. "You can't do everything, Mags," she told me gently one evening after I rushed in late. Still in a suit, missing half of Sophie's kindergarten recital. "You're human, not a machine." I hated hearing it. But deep down, I knew she was right. Lena never judged, but she never sugarcoated either. When Frank pushed for bigger risks, she raised an eyebrow I'd learned to respect. "Watch him," she said quietly one afternoon in the office. "He's got big dreams, but sometimes dreamers forget the ground beneath their feet." I brushed her off. At the time, love made me blind. Those years blurred into a whirlwind of diapers and contracts, school drop-offs and late-night calls with clients. I kept to calendars, one for business, one for Sophie Ann. Still felt like I was failing at both. Guilt was my constant companion. Guilt when Sophie cried as I left for the office. Guilt when I missed deadlines because she was sick with the flu. Guilt when Frank looked at me across the dinner table and I realized we hadn't had a real conversation in weeks. But alongside the guilt was pride. Reynolds Realty was climbing. Our name was respected. Our portfolio grew. We survived the dot-com crash of the early 2000s by pivoting toward residential markets. And when other firms faltered, we stayed steady. Clients trusted me. Employees looked up to me. Investors called me .yet. At home, sometimes caught Frank staring out the window as if looking for something more. Asterisk in 2008. The financial crisis hit. Housing markets collapsed. Firms folded overnight, and panic swept through Austin like wildfire. I worked around the clock, fighting to keep us afloat. We tightened belts, renegotiated loans, leaned on every relationship I'd built over decades. Lena and I practically lived in the office. Frank threw himself into aggressive strategies, some of which made me nervous, but we survived, barely. And survival only fueled Frank's hunger for more. We're invincible. Now, he said after we closed a major downtown redevelopment project in 2010. This city is ours. I smiled. But unease stirred in my gut. Invincible wasn't a word I trusted through all the chaos. Sophie grew bright, curious, and with a streak of independence I recognized all too well. She loved horses, art projects, and sleepovers at Lena's. She loved me too, though sometimes I wondered if she saw me more as the woman rushing in and out than the mother who should have been there at bedtime. Once, when she was about 8, she asked, "Mama, why are you always working?" I froze, tried to explain, tried to tell her I was building a future for her. But her eyes said what words didn't. She didn't want a future. She wanted me. That moment haunted me more than any bad deal or missed opportunity. By 2012, Reynolds Realty was thriving. Sophie was thriving, and from the outside, we looked like a family who had it all. But beneath the surface, the cracks widened. Frank pushed harder into high-risk ventures. Lena grew more cautious. I felt torn between them, between the man I loved and the woman who'd stood beside me through everything, and somewhere in that divide, Victor entered our lives. The 2010s dawned with promise. Austin was booming tech startups sprouting like wildflowers. Young professionals flooding the city, skyscrapers rising where old warehouses once stood. For real estate, it was the land of opportunity. And Reynolds Realty was right at the center. Our office on Congress Avenue buzzed with life agents closing deals, assistants juggling calls, Sophie's bright new marketing campaigns plastered on billboards. I'd walk through the floor each morning, coffee in hand, soaking up the energy like sunlight. We weren't just selling houses anymore. We were developing properties, managing portfolios, flipping entire neighborhoods. Our name carried weight. When Reynolds Realty was attached to a project, people paid attention. Sophie, now in her 20s, brought in a fresh edge. "You can't just sell a home," she'd say, waving her iPad. "You sell the dream, the lifestyle. Instagram it. Make it viral." Her instincts were sharp, and I let her run with them. Soon our listings weren't just in newspapers, they were trending online, drawing buyers from California, New York, even overseas. Frank, meanwhile, chased bigger fish. He wanted skyscrapers, luxury condos, multi-million-dollar investments. I admired his ambition, but it scared me too. "Don't you ever think small, Maggie?" He teased one night over dinner, swirling wine in his glass. "I think steady," I replied. "And steady wins the race." He smiled. But there was distance in his eyes. In 2012, Victor Martinez entered our orbit. He was 35, polished, with an MBA from UT, and the kind of charisma that filled a room before he even spoke. He wore sharp suits, knew everyone worth knowing, and had a knack for making investors open their wallets. He came to us with a proposal. It's a joint venture on a mixed-use development downtown. I was cautious at first, but his numbers checked out and his network was impressive. We closed the deal and he slid into the company like he'd always belonged. Victor was magnetic. Clients loved him. Employees admired him. And even Sophie thought he was cool. He brought energy, ambition, and results. But something about him put me on edge. He was too smooth, too quick with compliments, too practiced in his charm. Still, I told myself, Maybe I was just being protective of the business I'd built with my own blood and sweat. With Victor in the picture, the push-on-pull between Frank and me intensified. Victor encouraged Frank's big dreams. "You've got the capital, the reputation, the city behind you," he said during a late-night strategy meeting. "Now's the time to scale up, Maggie. Nationwide, international even." Frank beamed, fueled by the validation. I, on the other hand, felt my stomach knot. "I didn't build this company to gamble it away on empires," I snapped. Victor leaned back, smiling that politician's smile. "It's not gambling, Maggie. It's vision." The words stuck in my head like a thorn. It began with numbers. I've always trusted numbers. They don't lie. People can twist words, cloak intentions, but math is honest. So when the escrow account reports started drifting, just a few thousand here, then tens of thousands, I felt the familiar itch of something being wrong. At first, I thought it was a clerical error. I stayed late in my den, the one room in the house that still felt entirely mine, surrounded by farm photos, Sophie's childhood drawings, and the scent of lavender from the candle I always lit when I worked. I combed through ledgers, invoices, wire transfers, and the more I looked, the more the numbers fought me. Funds had been moved, documents altered, signatures forged. My heart thudded as I compared dates and saw a pattern. The money wasn't vanishing, it was being rerouted carefully, intentionally. I knew whose hands were on it, Victor's single quotes. But when I dug deeper, when I found the email thread buried in the archives, my stomach turned to ice because Frank was in on it. They weren't even careful. Doctored contracts, falsified inspection reports, plans to siphon millions into shell companies. And then the line that split me in two. "She's too cautious," Victor had written. "Frame her for fraud, force a buyout. Apex investors will pay $75 million for the company without her. And Frank, my husband." My partner had replied, "Do it. I'll handle Maggie. She won't see it coming." I sat there in the glow of the laptop, trembling. 24 years of marriage, a business built on sweat and sacrifice. A daughter who adored her father, and he was plotting to destroy me. I pressed my palm to my chest, feeling my heart race like I was standing in the path of another tornado. But this time, it wasn't wind tearing at me. It was betrayal. That night, I waited for Frank in the kitchen. The moonlight spilled across the tiles, silver and cold. When he came in, loosening his tie, he froze at the sight of me. I must have looked like a ghost. "Frank," I whispered, my voice cracking, "how could you?" He blinked, then tried to recover, setting down his briefcase. "Maggie, what are you doing?" I snapped. My hands shook, but my voice sharpened. "I've seen the emails, the ledgers. You and Victor, you're stealing from me. From us. From Sophie." For a moment, I thought he'd deny it. But then his face crumpled and he dropped into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he muttered. "I just, was drowning, piece by piece." The confession spilled out. During the pandemic, when deals slowed and stress mounted, Frank had gambled on crypto. Everyone was making money, he said, his voice bitter. Except me. He'd borrowed, lost, borrowed more. By the time I found the discrepancies, he was $600,000 in debt to men who didn't forgive debts. Victor had found out. And instead of helping, he'd offered Frank a deal. Join him, frame me, sell the company, and clear the slate. He promised I'd be free, Frank said, his eyes wet. I thought I could fix it, Maggie. For us. My laugh was hollow. You were willing to ruin me. To ruin everything. His silence was the answer. The worst part wasn't the theft. It wasn't even the betrayal. It was the plan. Frank admitted it under the weight of my stare, his voice barely audible. If you didn't go quietly, if you fought the buyout, he swallowed hard. Victor said we'd make it look like an accident. An accident. My blood ran cold. He couldn't meet my eyes. The brakes. Your car. A family drive, maybe? No one would question it. I staggered back, gripping the counter to stay upright. My own husband. My own partner. The father of my child. He was planning my death. Fear clawed at me, but something else rose stronger. Fury. Mama's voice echoed in my head, clear as if she were standing beside me. If the world hands you a bad harvest, plant something new. That week, I barely slept. I paced the house at 3 a.m., chamomile tea cooling in my hands, staring at the shadows on the walls. Sophie was out of town at a marketing conference. Thank God, at least she was safe for now. But what if she wasn't? What if Victor and Frank decided she was a loose end too? I thought of the tornado that flattened our barn back in Willow Creek. How Mama had cried over the rubble but then rolled up her sleeves and rebuilt. That same grit pulsed in me now. I wasn't going to be their victim. I remembered a client from years earlier, Alina Vargas, a woman who'd started over after divorcing a corrupt banker. She had gone into private investigation, specializing in financial crimes. Sharp, discreet, relentless. I dug out her number and called Alina. I said, my voice low, I need your help. I think my husband and my business partner are trying to kill me. There was a pause. Then her calm reply, tell me everything. And for the first time since I opened those emails, I felt a flicker of hope, because if they thought I was too cautious, too blind to see them coming, they had no idea who they were really dealing with. Alina listened without interrupting. When I finally ran out of words, there was silence on the line, heavy as stone. Then she spoke, calm, certain. Maggie, you've got two choices. You run or you fight. And I know you. Running isn't in your blood. She was right. Willow Creek grit. Years of rebuilding. Every scar, every lesson had led to this moment. I wasn't going to crumble. I was going to fight. Alina dug in immediately. She tapped her network, pulling Victor's history, scouring old deals. Within a week, she uncovered what I'd suspected, but never proved. This wasn't his first game. 2 firms in Dallas, 1 in Houston. All had faced mysterious financial collapses after Victor joined. In each case, he walked away clean. The companies gutted, their founders ruined. Charges had been filed more than once, but each time he slipped away, leaving just enough confusion, just enough scapegoats. He's a predator, Alina said flatly. And Frank's the perfect prey, desperate, compromised. Easy to control. Hearing it put words to the nightmare I'd been living. I forced myself back into the office like nothing had changed. Smiling at Victor in meetings, bringing Frank coffee like always, joking with staff about Austin traffic. It was excruciating. Every time I looked at Frank, I saw the man who had plotted my death. Every time Victor smirked across the boardroom, I imagined him shredding evidence. But I smiled. I played the loyal wife, the cautious partner. If they suspected I knew, the game was over. Behind the mask, I built my case. I started leaving breadcrumbs, fake ones. A misplaced folder on my desk with fabricated reports suggesting Victor was laundering money through shell companies. A few deliberately vague emails from a dummy account, implying I'd contacted regulators. I knew Victor's type, arrogant, paranoid, the kind of man who couldn't stand the idea of someone being 2 steps ahead. Sure enough, within days, he was agitated, pacing in his office, barking at staff, calling Frank at odd hours. They were panicking. With Elena's help, I installed discreet recorders in my office, my SUV, even in the den at home. I backed up company servers, pulling every suspicious document. One night, after Frank stumbled in late, reeking of whiskey, he muttered, "It'll all be over soon. She won't even see it coming." He didn't realize my phone was recording from the nightstand. Every slip, every whisper, every shred of evidence. I captured it. They thought they were setting me up, but I flipped it. I arranged a family trip to Galveston, playing right into Frank's suggestion. Smiled sweetly when he offered to check the brakes at a gas station. What he didn't know was that my mechanic friend had already swapped the fluid with a traceable marker, something the FBI could test. The car looked sabotaged, but safely so. Meanwhile, I had already sent an anonymous dossier to the Bureau, Victor's shady history, Frank's debts, the recordings, the forged emails, the bank transfers. Alina packaged it neatly, airtight. Now, it was only a matter of timing. We left Austin on a warm Friday morning. Sophie thought we were going for a mother-daughter weekend at the beach. But I insisted she stay behind work trip, I told her. Truth was, I wanted her nowhere near the danger. Frank drove, Victor trailing us in his car. My stomach churned, but my face stayed calm. The mask nailed tight at the gas station outside LaGrange. Frank popped the hood. Pretending to check fluids, I watched from the passenger seat, heart pounding. He fiddled with the brake line just long enough to hang himself. I texted Alina one word. Now, 10 minutes later. Red and blue lights flared in the rearview mirror. Highway patrol. Then unmarked black SUVs. Sirens split the air. Frank Reynolds, Victor Martinez step out of the vehicles. Frank froze. Victor swore, slamming his fists on the dashboard. And I sat there, calm as the Texas sky, as agents swarmed. It unraveled fast. Victor was caught shredding files back at the office agents had raided while we were on the road. Frank's brake tampering was recorded, the marker fluid undeniable proof. Every lie. Every scheme collapsed under the weight of evidence I'd laid like stones as they were handcuffed. I looked at Frank one last time. His eyes searched mine, pleading, but I had nothing left to give. You made your choice, I whispered. He dropped his gaze. The man I once loved swallowed by his own ruin. Victor sneered as they dragged him away. You think you've won, Maggie? You'll be nothing without me. I smiled, cold, steady. Watch me. The house felt too quiet after the storm. For weeks, reporters crowded outside the gates, their cameras flashing, their voices a blur of questions. Did you know? Was your husband involved? What happens to the company now? I gave them nothing but silence. The story spoke for itself. Front-page headlines, primetime specials. Betrayal in the boardroom. The Austin real estate empire that ate itself. Victor was indicted on multiple counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Frank faced charges too, though Alina told me he might bargain for a lighter sentence by testifying against Victor. I didn't follow every twist of their downfall. I didn't need to. The law had them now. What mattered was what came next for me, for Sophie, for the company I had built at first. Walking into the office felt like walking through ashes. Desks sat abandoned, staff whispered in corners, clients flooded with calls of uncertainty. But then I remembered Mama after the tornado, standing in our broken barn with tears on her cheeks, telling us we rebuild. That's what Reynolds women do. So I rolled up my sleeves, I held town halls with my employees, laying out the truth with no varnish. Yes, the company had been shaken. Yes, its leaders had betrayed it. But the foundation, the real work, the clients, the community was strong. One by one, heads lifted, shoulders straightened. They believed again because I did. The company couldn't stay what it was. Reynolds and Martinez was tainted. The name carried scars, so we rebranded. Clean slate. I chose Horizon Realty Group, a name that spoke of looking forward, of new skies beyond the storm. Sophie took charge of marketing, her ideas fresh and bold. Billboards with clean lines and sunrises. Social media campaigns about trust, resilience, rebuilding. Within months, clients were returning. New ones? 2 people drawn not despite the scandal, but because of the story. Survivors trust survivors. Frank wrote me letters from prison. Apologies. Explanations, please, for forgiveness. I read them, every one. And then I tucked them into a drawer. I didn't hate him, not anymore. Hate was heavy, and I had carried enough. But I couldn't forgive him either. Some wounds cut too deep. One day, maybe Sophie would visit him. That was her choice. Mine was to move forward untethered. People expected me to gloat, to strut, to boast, to rub Victor's downfall in the faces of everyone who once doubted me. But that wasn't me. Victory wasn't about revenge. It was about survival, about proving to myself, most of all, that I could walk through fire and come out whole. I hosted a dinner instead, quiet and intimate. Just Sophie, Elena, a few loyal friends. We sat under string lights in the backyard, passing wine and laughter. toasting to second chances. For the first time in years, I felt peace, planting something new one Saturday. Sophie and I drove back to Willow Creek. The old farmhouse was weathered but standing, the fields wide and golden under the sun. We walked the land together, and I told her stories of Mama, of the tornado, of how every ending is a beginning if you choose to see it that way. Mama, Sophie said softly, if you didn't just survive this, you turned it into something better. Her words caught me off guard. I blinked back tears, then smiled. That's what Reynolds women do. We planted a tree that day, right near the edge of the field, a live oak, steady and enduring. A reminder that roots matter, but so does growth. As the seasons turned, Horizon Realty flourished. We rebuilt stronger, cleaner, bolder. My name carried weight again, not because I fought to keep it, but because I had walked through betrayal and built something brighter at night. When the house was quiet, I would sit by the window with a cup of tea, watching the sky bleed from twilight to stars, and I would whisper to myself, not as reassurance, but as truth, I am still standing. Not because I was spared, not because I was lucky, but because storms don't break me. They shape me. They always have. They always will.